is by the child born. Emmanuel, God in us, the King of Kings who is here to set you free. He gave his life on the cross, down in hell to the Lord. Now he reigns from above, the King of Kings who was raised to set you free.
It's the morning star rising from the sunset. Bring it back home like a conquest. In that great shout, hallelujah, like a gun clap. One crown, one throne, one chair. Angakona uwana. Inena tena ni pula pula. Inena yatinena, pula pula. The champ is here and not to defend his title. To put an end to your defeat cycle. To humble the exalted and to exalt the humble. The weakness of every challenge is pride. If you see a high horse, don't take it right. He who wants to battle, let him strangle himself. Put a mic cord, your arms too short to box with God. You've entangled in the struggle. Welcome to the end of your hustle. Tonight, we're rolling with the king of the castle.
Peace and blessings, family. Peace and black power. We are live, and today in another session of Rise on Sundays, we are going to discuss the importance of Africa claiming Comet, aka ancient Egypt, aka Tamari, as our classical civilization. And as a starting point, I will refer to the great scholars that came before us, who laid the foundation for us for African scholarship in terms of restoring our historical narrative, and the scholars that we whose shoulders we stand upon are scholars such as Cheikh Anta Diop, and a great French scholar, or rather from the former French colonized countries, and also some of the scholars, your Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan, Dr. Hendrik Clark, and so we use them. They are our foundation. The work that they do is our foundation, and so we have to use them as our benchmark, because every culture is built upon its elders, it's built upon its ancestors. So in the realm of African scholarship, we have these scholars as our foundation, as our benchmark, from which we can start maneuvering and surveying the land. So beginning with, I will start with the text by Cheikh Anta Diop. It's titled Civilization or Barbarism and Authentic Anthropology. Cheikh Anta Diop was also an anthropologist. This text was published in 1991, and in the foreword on page 18, I'll actually begin page 17. And in the foreword, it states that in the introduction to Civilization or Barbarism, Diop explains the methodology he used in putting the book together, the conclusions he reached, and how he documented these conclusions, both with fact and logic. In setting forth his arguments, he had to deal with contradictions that relate to Egyptian history and to African history in general. He repeatedly refers to the southern African origins of the Egyptians. He infers that the Nile River was the world's first cultural highway, stretching 4,000 miles into the body of Africa, bringing culture and people out of the heart of Africa, who gave stimulus to Egypt and constantly renewed its energy. In Chapter 1, Prehistory, Race and Origin, Origin of Humanity and Racial Differentiation, Diop explains the early development of Africa and how its cultures and religions eventually influenced the Western world in particular and the whole world in general. Diop states, the general problem confronting African history is this: how to reorganize effectively through meaningful research all of the fragments of the past into a single ancient epoch, an origin which will reestablish African continuity. If the ancients were not victims of a mirage, it should be easy to draw upon another series of arguments and proofs for the union of history of Ethiopian and Egyptian societies for the rest of Africa. Thus combined, these histories will lead to a properly patterned past in which it would be seen that ancient Ghana arose in the interior West Africa of the continent at the moment of Egyptian decline, just as the Western European empires were born with the decline of Rome. So, why I decided to bring up this subject is for various reasons. Whenever we discuss or whenever we tweet about ancient Egypt, about Comet and its black origins, we obviously in the world of quote unquote white supremacy, we always face opposition, but we are not faced by that opposition because any form of greatness will always be faced with opposition for obvious reasons: envy, jealousy, and So the interesting part, I think, the obvious opposition would then be your Europeans or Eurasians, primarily the Europeans who actually started the narrative in the 19th century that ancient Egypt could not have been a Negro civilization. These are the words that they used, as it was far too advanced and therefore was a civilization of the great white race. And one of the great scholars that we follow, Anthony Browder, who is doing great work in Comet, where he's involved in the restoration of the many tombs. He's mainly focused on the 25th dynasty tombs. And he pointed out that Henry Breasted, when he issued his first edition of his text, I think it's something about the ancient world or something. I just forgot the name of the text. But in the text, in the original text, he draws upon, he actually comes up with the conclusion that ancient or Kemet was an African civilization based on the comparisons is made with the ancient culture, with the cultures of Africa. And then a few years later, he was apparently funded by this man, David Rockefeller, and then he reissued the same text as a revised version, where he removed everything about ancient Egypt being a black civilization, and he actually flipped 180 degrees and said it was a the civilization of the Great White Race. But he's not the only one. So from there, many of the archaeologists, Egyptologists came out with the same narrative, and so it built from there, which then became an opportunity for the Caucasians living in Egypt, who are descendants of the multiple cultural interactions that have happened through the various times since Kemet became invaded by the different groups from the outside world. The first invasion being the Hyksos. Many people assume that the Hyksos were of Asiatic, and obviously when people speak of Asiatic, they always think of a Caucasian type of race. But we obviously know better, that we do have Asiatic people, Asiatic people that are as black as people in Central Africa, but yeah. So, but we do know that there are Caucasian races that came in. The Assyrians came in and invaded, the Greeks, and eventually the Romans, and then the Arabs. So we can see the whole. I mean, that Egypt is actually as multicultural as the United States and South Africa. So when someone says modern Egyptians, they're not really saying anything. If you've ever been to Egypt, you will know when you're walking around, you will see people that are pitch black, and you'll see people that are as white as the Greeks. And so, but then the argument, obviously, with everybody wanting to associate with ancient Egypt, for obvious reasons, it is the best thing that's ever happened to human beings. It remains a great wonder, not a great wonder in terms of, that was beautiful in its time. No, Kemet is futuristic in the sense that modern Western science cannot explain how the monuments were put together. And so, just to give an example, the Japanese at one point a few decades ago attempted to sort of rebuild a pyramid, go and cut out limestone blocks, and their first assumption, which was an error, was for them to actually assume that they used primitive tools. But Cheikh Anta Diop advised them that they should not use primitive tools because they used advanced tools at the time. But obviously, people often project, especially the biggest problem with the study of Kemet by Europeans. They tend to project themselves onto the culture in order to interpret it according to how they are, instead of trying to interpret it from the perspective of the people and their culture. So, therefore, the pale, the pale, or rather the Caucasian type that finds itself in Egypt today, then took the opportunity to say that they are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, and obviously there are, as I said, there are different races there, and it's impossible for I wouldn't imagine how different races would evolve in one region in opposite directions. That would be a very interesting scientific phenomenon to be explained. But that pretty much tells us that amongst those different races that live in Egypt today, only one of them are the true indigenous people. So the light-skinned ones, obviously, being the ones in charge due to the Arab rule in the land, Arab imperialism, they tend to control the narrative at the end of the day. In terms of the official narrative, when it comes to the history, I mean, if you're gonna look at who is the head of antiquities in ancient Egypt and all these things, all the authorities that are in charge of the actual antiquities, the history, all the monuments and the artifacts and how the artifacts are to be displayed, which artifacts are to be placed in the forefront and which ones are to be hidden and whatnot, you know. So yeah, that then becomes the progression of different people claiming ancient Egypt. And we even know of articles where they've said that King Tutankhamun is related to most British men today. So yeah, we can all see that the need for everybody to attach themselves to the culture, and also it's not just because it was great back in its days, it's still great today. It's still great tomorrow. It's still the greatest tomorrow. Every form of government, law, engineering, architecture, everything that you see in the Western world did not reinvent the wheel. They drew from ancient Egypt and basically just copied that, and to a point of even removing monuments out of Comet and taking them across to the Western world, where we have the Tekenus. A Tekenu is an obelisk which are found all around Europe, with the example of the one at St. Peter's Square in Rome and another one that lies in Paris. And of course, the Washington Monument is a replica of the same obelisk. So we can see how African culture has been the foundation of everybody's building structure all around the world, whether it's Asian civilizations, whether it's Western civilizations. So I started out by reading Cheikh Anta Diop, Civilization or Barbarism, where he points out the reason why we should draw upon Kemet as our classical civilization. Basically paraphrasing what he has said, that we need to have a unified history, and not just, yes, we've got, I mean, Africa has a history going back to long before ancient Egypt. That's one thing which has been established. As far as the Western world, they've only admitted to only as far as Sudan being predating ancient Egypt, with the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago that had an expedition in the Sudan prior to the construction of the Aswan Dam that would flood the whole area, and they knew that the history would eventually be disappear forever, with temples having to be moved and all that. And out of that project, they found that there was a pharaonic empire that existed in the Sudan prior to ancient Egypt. But Keith Seal, who was heading the institute at the time, figured it's good information, but we're not going to let it out into the public. It will not be published. And then he sat upon it, and upon his death, his colleague, just trying to think of his name now. His colleague eventually decided to publish the archaeological findings, and an article came out in 1979, where, this expedition happened in the 60s. So this is over a decade later. And the article came out and said a monarchy, the oldest monarchy in the world found in the Sudan. So, but as African scholars, we have found even deeper than that. We put together the different parts of the history. We look at, for example, the oldest mathematical instrument that was found in southern Africa, between South Africa and Swaziland, is called the Bomba Bone, which is the oldest mathematical instrument. Even when you go into there's a document called I think it's the mathematical something. I just forgot. I'll refer to it when I remember it. And the actual artifact is obviously in Europe, in a museum somewhere in Europe. So we can see when we look at Inzalo Elanga in South Africa, where we see, which is the oldest astronomical structure, there we see the foundation of ancient Egypt, because ancient Egypt was built on the foundation of astronomical concepts that are found in Neptune. Neptune is younger than Inzalo Elanga, which is in South Africa, in the Mpumalanga province, the birthplace of the sun. So the first reason is our scholars, our great scholars who have laid the foundation for Afrocentric scholarship. Afrocentric, emphasis on Afrocentric because ancient or African history during the 19th century was documented from a Eurocentric perspective. And that is problematic on two levels. One, obviously, where they decided to write out of hate and envy because they truly want to be us. And the other aspect is the limitations as foreigners in interpreting what they are looking at. And just as an example, if I take I remember when I came back from Egypt in 2018, I was sitting outside, my neighbor is like, so how did it go? And I was like, no, it went well. And I gave him an example on purpose. And my neighbor is Zulu. And I gave him an example. Oh, so he actually asked me about those people over there. But in his mind, he's thinking that the Arabs are the Pharaoh's descendant and all that. But so I gave him an example with the high priest, how the high priest, being an advisor to the king, making him part of the royal assembly, he wore leopard skin. So when I told him that, he's like, it means we got Mazul. So, and for me, that was like, that's how simple it is. If you take a child from India, from Europe, Asia, Africa, and then they look at that part of the monument where they just look at the high priest and you explain the high priest and what the function of the high priest was, and they see that, only one of these children will be able to relate and say, oh no, that makes sense. Because he can relate to what he's seen back home. The rest can't relate to it. So when Europeans look at the high priest wearing leopard skin, they can come up with whatever interpretation and make up stories around it, but that's where the disadvantage would be, even though they are not biased themselves, but they have a limitation because they are foreign to that culture. So Cheikh Anta Diop speaks of the unification of African history, where we come together and restore our story as one story, not as multiple stories. Yes, we have variations of the culture. And so I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Africa only has one culture. Yes, one of the Europeans who is actually against the concept, she wrote a book and said Africa is not a country. She was right. Because when we look at any multi-racial country, the people are different. If you look at, for example, South Africa, the people that live in the northwest called Botswana, they have more in common with people in the neighboring country of Botswana than they do with the rest of the people of their countrymen or countrywomen. Likewise, the people who live in the province called the Free State have more in common with their neighbors, with our neighbors as a country of Lesotho, than they do with the rest of the people that they share citizenship with. So yes, Africa is not a country, because a country would comprise of a country. If we look at the borders of Africa, Africa has always had borders, but the difference between these borders and the European borders or colonial borders, a lot of people have not come to understand, is that the African borders they were formed according to the people's unification. So Monomotapa would range from Zambia all the way to Southern Africa, and that would be their border based on the unification of the people, or whether it's the Congo, Angola and Mozambique used to be, I think it would include, no, not in Mozambique, no. Angola and the DRC. Yes, I think in the DRC used to be, yeah. Angola and what you call DRC, which Angola became Portuguese and the DRC became French. These were one country because of the kingdom. The kingdom, it was one kingdom. And so it was the African borders were there, but they were formed based on our unity. And then the Europeans came and divided according to their purpose, which was to divide us. Hence, whenever just looking at the South African borders, everybody, where the borders cut, is mostly between families. Lesotho and Free State is the same people. They speak the same language, but they're divided by a border where they need to have a passport. So yes, we did have borders. So yes, Africa is not a country. Africa is a village. And a village is a group of families who share the same values, interests, and principles. They have the same culture. However, there will be variations between two brothers who move out of their houses and form their own households. These two brothers will have variations of set of rules, but they will be built upon the same set of rules that they were handed over to by their parents when they lived in their home together growing up. But as they move and form their own household, they might have one might add another rule, or one might remove another one, or there might be a different application to the same rule. So Africa essentially has one culture with many variations. So this we can only see when we take Cheikh Anta Diop's approach of putting all the fragments of the past into one single ancient epoch. So this is where Kemet, or ancient Egypt, comes in. So the second group of opposition, so the first group that I mentioned regarding our opposition, obviously being Europeans, but then the people that are actually pushing their agenda the strongest are the middle races which live in Kemet, or in Egypt right now. Your Arabs and the group that calls themselves We Are Modern Egyptians. When they are modern Egyptian does not describe any one form of people. I am pretty much, for a South African standard, I'm dark skinned, but the picture I took with a brother in Abu Simbel in Egypt, I looked rather quite light skinned next to him. So I don't know what they mean by modern Egyptian. Obviously, they just referring to their skin type and phenotype. But skin type and phenotype, Africa has all of them. When I say Africans, I mean black people. So the second group of opposition, or the third group rather, because the first group are Europeans and then the middle races, and then the third group are African people, black people that will come out and say, nah, we are East Africans, and in fact, well, we've seen these quite a few times throughout my years of tweeting about it, and the latest was coming from a guy who claims he's from Tanzania, and this was just yesterday, and where I actually, the so-called modern Egyptian showed a mummy of Seti the First, Pharaoh Seti the First, and stated that according to him or her, that the features of the mummy resemble a modern Egyptian. And so I took a like a collage of a picture that shows Seti I with East African and the East African phenotype, showing exactly that they look exactly the same. You could actually say it's the same person. So I used that to basically just dismiss the whole thing of resemblance and whatnot, because obviously they never want to really go into cultural similarities. They only want to talk about, he's got a nose like that. Where does a sharp or pointy, whatever the nose called aquiline, where does it come from? It comes from Africans. Long before the pale-skinned people had it, we had it. The dark-skinned people, the black people had it. We had all those features. We are their parents, after all, so we passed them down to them. So, so when I used that, and the guy came in and then took it out of context and said that those people they don't stay in Egypt, those people are the Maasai, those people are this and that, and so on. But obviously the guy knew that I wasn't saying that the specific people, because you can see what culture it belongs to by the way they're dressed. But he knew that I wasn't saying that they actually are the Egyptians. But he kept on, and so I then presented to him. I presented to him there is a text by, his name is very difficult to pronounce. Keep Kushe Arab Sambu. Well, it's Dr. Sambu. Let me just say Dr. Sambu. Dr. Sambu really did a project, because there are people that live in East Africa. They're found in Kenya, they're found in Tanzania, They are called the Kalenjin people. And these people have an oral tradition that they came from Misri or Misri, whatever pronunciation one uses. And Misri is basically being ancient Egypt. And so the man was like, no, but how can black people who do not even profess to Islam claim to have originated from Egypt, which is such an Arabic and Islamic geographical setting? But the Kalenjin people of Kenya have held on fast to a tradition that their ancestors in antiquity were part of an ancient pharaonic Egypt, which they variously call Tito or Misiri. As unlikely it may sound, the persistence in keeping this oral tradition alive does not seem to be dying with time and distance from the claimed place of origin. So just reading from the synopsis of his book. It's called The Misiri Legend Explored. It's the doctor is a linguist. So this is a linguistic inquiry into the Kalenjin people's oral tradition on ancient Egyptian origin. So I presented this to the brother, and I have friends in Tanzania who some come from Kenya and so on. So because the guy who was disputing what I had posted, he speaks Swahili, and hey, anybody can speak Swahili. The Europeans moved to Tanzania for business opportunities. They go and open resorts there. 2 years having stayed there, they can speak some Swahili. So not impressive. So I figured, let's see if, and he actually said this is his country. So it came from that line or that angle where you say, but no, and he even said you probably stay in the diaspora. For some reason, a lot of people think when they see me tweeting, they think I'm from the States. But I think generally because this has been mostly the whole, I think African Americans embrace Kemet much more than the rest of us. I think we all can learn from them in that perspective, you know. Even when I was there, the only black people I saw were African Americans. Yeah, I saw quite a few. One we became friends. We even visited one time my place in Joburg. We even shot a video put it up on a live video, put it up on YouTube about the the modern descendants of Kemet still being alive, you know. So yeah, we were just sharing our experience and how we, coming from different hemispheres of the planet, how we came to meet in one place and share this moment of our ancestral greatness, you know. So obviously his assumptions, and he figured I probably only speak English, and he could just basically say, well, I'm from Tanzania. This is my country, and these people live next to me, so you can't tell me anything. So I posted up a call that I made with a friend of mine from Tanzania. She's Luo. And it so happens that the Luo people as well have an oral tradition of having come from Kemet. And I was actually surprised to actually find that even on Wikipedia. I never really look at Wikipedia. It's highly unreliable, but I was actually surprised that even Wikipedia states that the Luo people are found in Egypt, Sudan, and all that. But the Luo people, their oral tradition is that they came from Egypt, Sudan, and they traveled up the Nile until they ended up in Kenya. And so that was my conversation with him. I've also had a conversation with another brother from West Africa who said, nah, you guys love Kemet because white people love it. And no, we are not descendants of ancient Egypt. We've got our own great civilizations. We've got the Songhai Empire, the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire. Embrace that. Leave Egypt alone. And so when I engage the brother, obviously, and then he eventually blocked me. I like it when people block me. It means I'm doing a good job annoying them. The truth is quite annoying to liars. So yeah, so it's always an honor. So in a nutshell, the third force of opposition against us studying ancient Egypt comes from our own people, the people that look like us, and that can only be explained by colonialism. So the purpose of this discussion then would not be to address the first opposition, who are the Europeans. I quite frankly don't really care what Europeans think. So yeah, the only time I engage them is to demonstrate to someone who was like me 5 years ago, didn't know about this. If I 5 years ago would actually see a European say whatever, you guys are trying to claim other people's culture, this is not your history and all that. In fact, you guys are not even native to South Africa. You guys came, the Dutch settled here before you. So, if I 5 years ago would see me 5 years later actually demonstrating with facts, punching out the nonsense, using scholarly evidence, scholarly punches, that would have served me well. I would feel that, wow, this has shifted my campus. And speaking of campus, the second scholar that I would like to go to that, because for me it's very important. As an African, anybody that steps into any field and does not honor those that laid the foundation, for me, though, that person can never be genuine, can never be real. It doesn't matter what field you go into, whether you go and study law or music, you need to, even when you actually go to university and you go and study law, they're going to tell you about the Romans. And obviously that's dumb, because they should be telling you about Africans and architecture. They'll probably, I don't know if they'll take you to the Greeks or the Romans, but everything in that you need to study. You cannot excel in anything when you do not draw upon you do not lay upon the foundation. It means you're building a house on a sand. So I, therefore, have to demonstrate that whatever I am bringing and presenting to the family right now, I'm laying my foundation upon they that came before us, who are the elders and the ancestors, Cheikh Anta Diop. And now I'm going to go to the great Dr. John Hendrik Clark. And he says, history is not everything, but it is a starting point. History is a clock that people use to tell the time of day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are, but more importantly, what they must be. So now, when he speaks of finding ourselves on the map of human geography, what does that mean? When we look at human geography in terms of contributions to civilization, and today if in fact, I just recall a video by Neil deGrasse, the famous astrophysicist, black astrophysicist in the United States. Brilliant man, however, his compass is a bit off because he's not well invested in history. And obviously, for obvious reasons, the miseducation of the Negro makes sure that you are trained to worship the Greeks and the Romans as soon as you get your master's and PhD. So that just comes with the territory. That's how the education system by the Western world has been packaged. So now, in that video, he speaks of naming rights. And he speaks about people can claim, this we Europeans can say, no, we started what. And he says, but hey, let's look at the names of the planets. Let's look at the word algebra. Let's look at, and he shows how all these words have Arabic roots, the Arabic words at the end of the day. And so he figured, hey, since the Arabs started it, then they could name, But yeah, that's just like the general principle. But in reality, so this comes into this example that I'm giving becomes important in understanding what it means, what human geography means. Because I even remember when my my brother had a debate with my dad about, because my brother was basically telling him that, no, we started all this. And so my dad said, well, what is the indigenous word for such and such? That was his argument. But obviously there's a lot that that's involved. There are many factors involved in all of that, because we, upon adopting, not really even adopting, but being a tongue being imposed upon a people, you obviously lose the use of many words. Even most of us today do not even know many of the native words that our parents know, that they have been using, especially they know them because growing up they knew the words. So the human geography, the world all around, whenever they see technology, whatever they see, whatever is happening, they can see who is contributing. They can see who is moving the world forward. And an average African, when they look around, they see the African being absent in everything. They feel like Europeans and Asians have been ruling the world forever, and they brought us technology, they brought us this. That's the general feel. And there's a reason for that. So the geography can only be fixed when you get the right you need to have the campus being history. So I even remember speaking to one sister when I came back from Egypt. She's Christian, and I said, and she mentioned, she mentioned something about Arabs, basically. I'm like, no, those are, the pharaohs look like you and I, by the way. She's like, no way, no ways. The Egyptians enslaved the people of God. Black people don't do that. We are not that evil. So we can even see a lot of the factors that have been introduced for us to reject our culture, because religion demonizes it. So the as I said, that the first force of opposition being the Europeans, and the second one being the middle races of the mulattoes that live in Egypt, who say that they are the descendants of ancient Egyptians. and speaking of DNA and all that. And I'm like, I mean, it's ridiculous. Chances are most of them, the mulattoes living, or those pale-skinned people that live in Egypt, chances are many of them will have DNA sharing with the ancient Egyptians, because it's not like when the ancestors invaded Egypt, they stayed in silos. They were all intermarried. So, just as the same way where many African Americans will test and find European DNA. That's why most African Americans, when they do DNA testing, they look at their maternal side, because they don't want to get a result that says you're Irish. Even though the guy might look as black as any West African. So the focus thing for me would then be the third force, being our people. The Africans will say, no, why are you guys obsessed? Why are you guys obsessed with ancient Egypt? Aren't there other great civilizations out there? And so this is where the focus should be. Our people who are lost, we're not interested in trying to change Europeans and Asiatic people and whoever. And obviously not all our people can be saved. Some will have to be left to I don't know, perish in their ignorance. Those that refuse the truth, there'll always be those that refuse the truth. So the importance of ancient Egypt. So the question is, why aren't we picking any other civilization? Why Comet? Why Comet? So the first reason from me is Comet is like an amalgamation of the African culture. It's a point where African culture built up in progression, slowly or quickly, whatever, from whatever perspective you look at it, and it developed and reached its zenith. So it reached its zenith in Comet. That's just a fact. And because you can't really, I know people trying to be tribalistic and thinking, well, I probably don't descend directly from ancient Egypt, so screw it. I think I'm focused on telling them we should focus on the Songhai, or, But we are not to have a tribalistic view to this matter, because the restoration of Africa, as the great African scholars of the Western Hemisphere told us, that Pan-Africanism is the answer to restoring Africa. It's not going to come from education. Well, education is important in terms of Afrocentric education and bringing the people up to speed consciously to bring us to that point, but it is not Western education degrees. It is not political gaining political power. We know that has failed, because no African country is sovereign today. We all have just puppet leaders that are waiting for instructions from their Western masters, and we know that it is not money, because as soon as you give 12,000 mentally enslaved Africans money, they will take it back right to Europe and buy Gucci and Remy Martin and all these European products, because they have an appetite for European culture. So that's where they're going to take their money, and so the money will go back to the hands of Europeans. So the answer is only one, and that is cultural unity of Africa. And that cultural unity is well expressed. Yes, you can find it. You can put it together by bringing in the Yoruba and the Zulu and comparing similarities and all that. Yes, you can do that. But it is well expressed in Comet. And Comet, the cool thing also is it is engraved in stone, is documented. Documented does we're not saying that it is the only proof or anything documented is proof in itself. But yeah, that's a discussion for another time. But when we look at the ancient Egyptian culture, we see what we as Africans are trying to do in order to restore Africa, because we're saying let's come together. How was Kemet formed? Kemet was formed through unification. The first ruler of Kemet is called a Simatau, and that means the unifier of the two lands. And the two lands did not just have two groups of people. The one land and the other land had multiple groups of people that spoke multiple different languages. So there were different clans, and we know that there's actually an ancient Kemetic text that speaks of a man from the Delta speaking a language that the man in the South does not understand. So it is a society that was formed by unification. The last that we have seen being Soshangani and Shaka Zulu. So, and when we speak of Pan-Africanism, that is what we are thriving towards, unification. And that is how ancient Egypt was built. The first project was to unify the people. Before anything was done, unification is what happened. I'm not saying there was nothing happening, but I'm talking about its real glory came about when the first project was achieved, which was to unify the Africans in Lower Kemet and the Africans in Upper Kemet. And this was done by the first pharaoh, Menes. And so Nama, yeah. So now, after having done that, we can see the multiple, everything that we see all around, from the Yoruba, from South Africans, from Zimbabweans, Shonans, and all the different cultures, in inverted commas, because I still hold the view that we only have one culture in Africa with many variations. So we can see there's that the many cultures coming together and forming one thing, one state, one unified state, and serving one God and building monuments towards that God. And so also the God, Kemet did not have many gods. It's also a European perversion through their interpretation, limitation, because it is not their culture. Just as Kemet had only one God. I know people in the conscious community don't like the word God, but there's nothing wrong with it. Discussion for another day. So, or I can use the divine for those that would continue being disturbed by me using the word God. So, there are many variations to the same divine. Just as Khepera, you can't tell me Khepera and Ra and Amen, those three Neteru are different gods, because all of them are the sun. And the same sun. It's just Kapara is the sun in the morning, and Ra, the full manifest presence of God, when the sun is at its highest point, and Amen is the sun when it's hidden at night, the hidden presence of God. Okay, so it is not just in the same way, in the same manner, Africa only has one culture. So now these people build this great empire that then becomes a lighthouse, and where they're positioned, people from the outside world, from Europe and Asia, see this light, and it draws them, and they come to Comet to learn Bantu culture, Bantu education. Yes, Bantu education is not a bad word. The Dutch settler, the barbarians, used it to pervert the word, but the oldest form of education was Bantu education, where the Greeks came to get Bantu education, educated by the Bantu priests of Kemet, and therefore leaving Kemet, going back home and building what they call Greek civilization. Then the Romans coming as barbarians, destroying, and then learning that we shouldn't have destroyed that, we should have just kept it, and then just maybe claim it as our own. And therefore the Romans managed to take credit for creating law, which the Greeks learned from Kemet, 42 laws of Ma'at. So that became the foundation of what you call law today. But if you go and study law, they don't give you that for obvious reasons, because the Europeans have managed to use every form of human civilization, the education, the whole social structure to glorify European culture. And so when the Greeks fall, we have the Romans that fall. And when Rome falls, what happens? Then we have the Arabs come and invade Africa, and through the Umayyad conquest. And the Arabs use the Africans and their knowledge to go into Europe, to dominate Europe. And crazy enough, the most famous, or the word Moor, which should have been associated with Arabs, because Arabs were the originators of the Umayyad conquest. But if you look at all the coat of arms and all that, you see black people. So the Moor became a black man. Doesn't matter, you can go and read Shakespeare's Othello the Moor, or whatever medieval European text about Moors. It's all related to evil black man, or the demonization of the black man. So we see then the Moors going into Europe. Europe falls after the barbarians, the 5 barbarian tribes of Europe invade the Roman Empire, because the Romans were basically enslaving all these Europeans, mostly the Europeans. They did enslave a few other like African groups, but mainly during those days, the main stock for slavery were the Europeans, because it was based on the importance of the society you come from, the importance of the culture you come from. So if you did not come from high culture, even one of the scholars, one of the Roman historians, he mentions that the British Isles, they have no literary or musical talents. They're only good as booty for slavery. So that's how they would value you based on the society you came from. And you would also, the same guy where he came from, this Roman writer, in the empire during his time, you had African people in high positions because of where they came from. People like Saint Maurice, a black man who came from Thebes in Egypt. Not a modern Egyptian, I think. Yeah. So we see then, and Europe was in its dark ages. It was a dark continent. Pay attention to the concept of projection here. So now the Moors go into Europe and lift Europe out of the dark ages. Using what? They used African culture, which the Greeks had gained through the people of Comet, and the Romans gained through via the Greeks and the priests of Comet, before they utterly destroyed the civilization. So then Europe becomes lifted out of the Dark Ages. In fact, the Moors having ruled Europe for 800 years, Europeans still, as a majority, Europeans hated these Africans called the Moors, but there was a small group that decided to overlook the hatred they have, out of obviously the envy, and decided to form a foundation for the Renaissance, as in where they would lay a foundation for them to take over. So we hear of King Alfonso putting up together this school where there will be translations, mass translations of Moorish text, which has its origins where? In Africa, in Comet. Algebra was taken to Europe by the Moors. But where did algebra come from? The oldest algebra, the oldest form of algebra is found in Comet. So what we see there, we see a progression of the same spirit of the Renaissance of civilization being carried first by the priests of Comet, to the Greeks, from the Greeks to the Romans, and then it falls apart, and the Moors then go and reinstate the same culture. So, and then they eventually kick out the Moors in 1470. In 1495, I think. Why am I remembering the year 1495? Even Stevie Wonder knows this history, even has it as a lyric in one of his songs. So the oldest form of algebra is in the so-called Rhind mathematical papyrus. I call it so-called Rhind because when the Europeans found these papyruses, they named them after themselves. So, yeah. So now, just after eliminating the Moors, the Europeans then came out and dominated the world. What did they use to dominate the world? African culture. Where did they get it from? From ancient Egypt. When we look at the formation of the most powerful country in the world, or nation in the world, we look at the United States, and it's built on ancient Egyptian culture, on Kemetic culture. When we look at Israel, we can talk about the Passover and its origins. We can talk about just the whole Judaism upon which the state of Israel is formed, come from ancient Egypt. They learned it from there. So we can see the importance of ancient Egypt to the rest of the world. And it's important for us to place ourselves in that picture. Why? Because it goes back to what Dr. John Henry Clarke was talking about, the the human geography, the map of the human geography. So if we're going to talk about human geography, we're talking about the whole world and how we should then place ourselves in that picture. It's a global picture, and we should place ourselves at that point in the picture where we have contributed to the Asian civilization, ancient Asian civilizations, to the ancient American civilizations, the Olmec and all the pyramids in America. The Chinese, even Kung Fu came from ancient Egypt. Well, the Asians got it through Kemet, but yes, we know it has its origins down south. So this is where we should be standing according to the elders. In the unification of African culture, we should use Kemet as our classical civilization. That does not mean anyone that has actually studied Kemetic civilization, it does not mean you disregard the Songhai Empire, you disregard the Muna or the Rosary Empire. It does not mean that. It actually means you understand them better, because if you're studying only Inzalo Yelanga, how well can you understand it if you are only studying one fraction of it? But when you start seeing how the alignment of the stones to the Orion constellation at Inzalo Yelanga in Mpumalanga, and you see the same thing in ancient Egypt in the pyramids, you start seeing that there is a story. The story does not end where you are. It's one story, it's just pieces of a puzzle. And that story reaches its zenith in Kemet. So hence Kemet should be our classical civilization, should be our point of reference where we unify all Africans. So when someone speaks of, I know there will be childish people and say, yeah, but your ancestors don't come from there. Which is really like, as in they're talking about you personally, which is really stupid, because even if you are part of the Songhai people, it does not mean you came from the Songhai royalty. You don't descend necessarily from the royal family in the Songhai Empire. So it really becomes a childish discussion. But for those that are interested really in the unification of Africa, the first starting point would be the unification of our history, which will bring about the unification of our cultural unification of African people. That is our only salvation as African people. And so, when people say, and then finally, just to add a spice to it, how even if one was to say, yeah, but who doesn't come from Kemet, it's more difficult to separate the rest of or Africans in the South, removing them out of Kemet. It's more difficult to do that than for us to say that we all belong in there, like in the practical sense of when you look at the Kalenjin people, who have been proven by linguistic inquiry that their language proves linguistically that indeed they came out of Kemet, and the scholar was able to see the time, because remember the Kemetic language, Kemet has been in power for over 3,000, 4,000, over 4,000 years. And the language has progressed, and hence it's been classified into Old Kingdom language. But obviously there was no one language in terms of during the Old Kingdom. There were many languages, but the language that was used on the monuments. Now, the scholar could tell at which era they actually left, based on the words that they were using. To give an example, if a brother left, let's say, stayed in South Africa in Pretoria in the 80s and left and moved to Australia or moved to wherever, to Kenya. And the guy came back. I mean, let's say he was older then, and he comes back. By the use of language, and he says, "Yeah, I used to stay here." And then when he speaks, and he refers to women as litonga, which is a slang that was used back in the 80s. If you're from Pretoria, it will paint a picture of this guy. Damn, so you've been long gone. We don't use those words no more, So linguistically, in this text, the writer or the author, the linguist, actually identifies, number one, that indeed their claim is true, and secondly, he is able to identify during which era they migrated out of Kemet. And then you have the Luo, then you have the Wolof people in West Africa, many people West Africa, and then we have the DNA of the family of Tutankhamun, which was released by DNA Tribes, which state that Tutankhamun and his family, just for the actual members of the family that were included in the study, and the DNA show that they are more related to people that live in Central and Southern Africa today. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop speaks of the Southern African origins of ancient Egypt. So now the African relation to ancient Egypt is not just it's manifold. Some people will speak of the migration of people who actually came out of Kemet that live among us. So if they live among us, probably they didn't live in silos and say, we don't intermarry, we come from Kemet, we don't want y'all mixing with our blood. The Luo people, the Kalenjin people, how long have they been living in Kenya? And so you can't really separate them from the rest of the people that live there. So genetically, you can't really separate them, and say those ones are not related to people in Kemet. So if you really get practical with it. But then, our relation is not just the migration out of Kemet. There is also the similarities that we see between us and the ancient Egyptians is not just because of the migration out of Egypt. There is also common ancestry. When we go into the Congo, they have so in Kemet there is a culture called the opening of the mouth ceremony. There's a text by Robert Ferris Thompson called 4 Moments of the Sun. So there he is speaking about the Bwende, the Bembe Nwombo of the Congo, the Mami open mouth. So he states that it's something they would. He states that the Nyombo being the ancestor, gesture also marks a person's transition from this world to the next. On behalf of his community, Nyombo hails heavens and the horizon line. When you die, you automatically become an ancestor, but not everyone becomes a Nyombo. Being buried in a Nyombo figure means the community believes this person will become our medium. And so what they would say in this whole ceremony is, go without tears, wet upon your face, represent our problems among the dead, be our medium. By similar interpretation, the open mouth, with the lips rendered in relief, symbolizes the leader speaking to the dead. The funeral is over, and now he is talking in the other world. All Nyombo should have open mouths. This means there is speech in the other world. If the open mouth of the Nyombo brings a parlance into the other world and tears code messages of shared concern, the towering gesture of the Nyombo, right hand up, left hand down, in similar significance, it maps the boundary to be crossed. It identifies a chord connection in life to the dead. It is a crossroads pose. So we find in the Congo, in the ancient Congo, same practice. As an example, we could go all day, all night on the similarities between the cultures. But now, seeing that in the ancient Congo does not mean that the people in the Congo came from Kemet. It basically could mean that it came from the Congo to Kemet, or is just, speaking of common ancestry. So, and some of the things Cheikh Anta Diop speaks of the Nile being a cultural highway. Africans have always interacted culturally. Even initiates were not only initiated in their immediate culture, one could be initiated into many. And even a text that I would also recommend for anyone that's interested in understanding the unification of African culture, I recommend the text by the late and the great Credo Mutwa. The book is called Indaba, My Children. So there he has many stories that he has collected from different parts of Africa. As this man was an initiate, and the great initiates were, they did not stay in one place. There was a lot of exchange of knowledge between Africans, and they would take it along, and so on and so on. And then the final thing I want to say is how he states that the fall of Kemet was then marked by the rise of the West African empires. Because you can see the cultural movement. The people that were staying in Kemet migrated. The Dogon are part of it. There's many of these people. And so we can see how we gave to Kemet as it, the inner Africa gave to Kemet as a parent gives to a child, and that child grows up, reaches its zenith, where the child represents everything that you have taught the child, your values, interests, and principles, and you are proud of this child having become something great. And then you get old, and that child comes back and takes care of you. You took care of the child. So we see the same cycle where in Africa birth is Kemet, and Kemet birth is the civilizations that came after your West African civilizations. And so it's like a rippling effect. And so this is why we need to look at Kemet as a classical civilization. And anyone that studies Kemet, that you can look at any scholar, they are all, it has nothing to do with disregarding other African civilizations, because it's all about the unification of all these African civilizations and actually making sense of the story, putting the pieces of the puzzles together. All right. Before I speak for 5 hours, I think we can open the floor for discussions, questions, comments, disputes, anyone that says, yeah, that is not true, anyone that has a counter argument with any evidence against anything I've said is welcome, believe it or not, because when the Bible writers use the proverb, iron sharpens iron, for iron to sharpen iron, they have to go in different directions. There has to be friction. They do not move in the same direction. You can never have friction when iron and iron move in the same direction. You sort of have to oppose them, create friction, and then they will be sharpened. So this is the reason why I'm a big fan of presenting my ideologies to a public platform so that they can be scrutinized. So fear not, if you are an opposer, you will not be victimized. We will only ask questions and ask for proof. That's all we do here. So yeah, if there's anyone that would like to speak, you can request. I see one request. Lisha has been added as a speaker. If you want to be added as a speaker, you may request, and then when we have other speakers, we'll have to use hands to be able to be recognized to speak. Yes, you may speak, family. Your hand is up. Yes, you may speak.
Hi, I just wanted to ask your opinion on the Anunnaki and who they were in ancient Egypt.
All right. Oh wow, the Anunnaki. Well, the ancient Africans spoke of the Anunnaki. I personally have never seen specific text on the Anunnaki from Comet, but there are stories about the Anunnakis within Africa. Dr. Credo Mutua speaks about them as well. Now, I'm not well vested in that subject, truly to say, but one thing that I have a very strong opinion on is the whole notion that the pyramids, because they are so magnificent, and truly I don't blame these people that actually come up with these ideas. If anyone has ever really looked at the technicality of the pyramids, how they are perfectly facing north, south, the orientation, with a margin of error that is so small that the only people today that can achieve that margin of error are people that make jewelry using telescopes. Now, did I say telescopes? Microscopes. Yeah, using microscope, not telescope. So yes, when they look at that and they cannot fathom how these things came about, they figured, hey, it's the aliens. The same as the Dogon. When NASA visited the Dogon, they went to dig up information. As they do, they always creep at night into our villages that we look down upon because those people don't look educated and polished as per the European standards. They just out there living life naturally. So the NASA did not look down upon them. They actually visited them at night, and the Dogon told them of a companion of Sirius A that can be seen. It's one of the brightest stars in the night sky. And there's an invisible companion called Sirius B, which has an orbit of a cycle of 50 years. And the Dogon told them about this. and even told them at which stage the cycle is at. So then NASA went back and put up their machines to try and actually confirm this, what the Dogon had claimed. And around this, the Dogon formed what they call the Sigi ceremony, the Sigi ritual that would happen at the end of the cycle, once in the 50 years. So the scientists of NASA went back and then they used their machines to try and locate this. It took them a while. They struggled to locate the star because with lenses, if you have a bright star next to a less bright one, it will be difficult to actually locate the one that is less bright, because the one that's bright, it's actually obscuring or obstructing your view at the end of the day. So, but they played around with the machines and eventually located the star and found that it's exactly at that point. So they went back to the Dogon and said, how did you guys figure this out? The Dogon didn't tell them. One of the scientists said, well, there are only two possibilities. It's either one, it's a coincidence, or two, they came into contact with aliens and the aliens told them about this. So he said, well, I'll go with coincidence, which is ridiculous because just knowing that there is such a star that you cannot see with an invisible eye, and even the equipment was really difficult to actually locate the star. It's impossible for it to be a coincidence. And to top it up, the guys even tell you its position, its current position, its stage in the cycle. Nah. So it's that whole notion of we can't say these black people did this. Let's say there has to be the Anunnaki, or the aliens, or someone from outer space that came to do this. So there is a lot of that narrative from Europeans. It's a different perspective from the African folklore and the tales where they speak of the Anunnaki, which is very figurative. Hence I say it's something that one needs to actually study in order to understand. It's not a literal thing. Because, when you look at African folklore, there's a lot of things that they speak about that reptilians and whatnot, and yeah, I'm not. So I've been introduced a little bit to all these things, but it's not something I had really studied much. But then one thing that now made me even more curious, when in South Africa, in Mpumalanga, the province of mysteries. I call it the province of mysteries because all these things are found in Mpumalanga. And Mpumalanga means where the sun comes out. So basically it's the birthplace of the sun. In Zaluyelanga, the so-called Adam's calendar is in the same place. The place is full of mysteries because the oldest ankh is found there. And why it remains a place of mysteries is all these things are scattered all around, but there's not much study being invested in people going there to actually do archaeology and document what they find and things. So there's a lot of speculation around these things. So there is one place where people have taken a picture. There's a rock with a huge footprint in the rock. The footprint is, you have people taking a picture next to the footprint, and that footprint is sometimes taller than the people. So, yeah, that in that aspect, I personally, to me, it personally makes sense. To me personally, it makes sense that there are other beings out there. If we have other galaxies, it would make sense that there are other beings out there. But the one part that I wouldn't understand is why these beings would come and build all these great monuments for us, earthlings and then leave. So yeah. Yes, ma'am, you may ask or speak.
Do you think that possibly these structures that they built was built for communication purposes?
Yes, I have heard that. So I have questions then. So what would be the communication for? Would it be for communication, them communicating with us earthlings, or
Maybe it's to lift us to a higher consciousness, like to higher consciousness.
okay?
And in order for us to be better people, maybe through meditation and through these devices, we can find those answers. Possibly?
All right, okay. Yeah, I see that. So, okay, so where I struggle with the whole concept of basically, because these monuments are so great, they have to have come from outside intelligence, outside of the human race. So the reason why I personally struggle with that is when I don't only look at Kemet in isolation. I look at the progression of the civilization building up from Southern Africa and going up, and its starting point for me would be the Bomba Bone, which becomes the first mathematical instrument that we find. And so we see this progression. It's not in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that Kemet was not built in one day. Like its perfection was gradual. It was gradual from region to region as it built up until we could see the fourth dynasty becoming so great. And then we also see its decline, because the interesting part about Kemet is that we see nothing after the fourth dynasty that even matches or is as great, because we see a decline. And yes, there are other pyramids in Kemet that have, if you walk past it, you're not going to know it's a pyramid. It just looks like a mound. It's not standing like those ones. So yeah, I don't know. Like so for me, that's the question in terms of how the progression came up, because first you have the step pyramid. That is, no one is saying, oh, how did they build that? You know, it's just a pyramid. It doesn't have all these fancy stuff like the Great Pyramid. And then we see its progression moving into Saqqara. Well, it's all at Saqqara there, and we see the pyramid of Sneferu. But eventually we see this one. So when I look at the progression itself, my question would be, were these aliens coming down and practicing all along the southern parts of the continent and moving along in Central Africa? Because you can see the development, and the development took ages. Even when we look at the zodiac itself, the zodiac is something that had to be developed at the equator, because for you to be able to see these constellations that are mapped out on the zodiac, you'd have to be standing at the equator. And they needed to form a full zodiac, you need at least, because one cycle of a zodiac is 25,000 years, so therefore you need at least 50 years to see a repeated pattern. So yeah, so that's basically my question and worry about that is, so if I started by making sandals, or perhaps I started by making a chariot, or even before a chariot, I started with the plow with the cows pulling it, and then I had the wheel, developed it into a chariot, and then from there you have the engine. So because that's basically what you see about Comet. At the end of the day, it was not born in one day. We see its development coming from the southern parts, you know. And even when we go to Tasseti being the oldest pharaonic empire found, which is in Sudan, we can see its development it was still at developmental stages, and also the the markings of the pharaoh sitting on the square or on the chair with a white crown. We can see that is like the beginning stages, and then we see its development. So that would really be my big question, being if it's so developmental over so many thousands of years, where do the aliens come in at that part? Do they only come in, or did they see us developing and they came in and said, "Okay, guys, you've done well. We'll take it from here." You know, so that's where I struggle with it. Yeah. All right. I don't know if you have any further questions around that, or if anyone else wants to speak. Anyone wants to holler? I see a request to speak. So Tsuebu. When you have been added, you may speak. So I think interaction with aliens anyway would be something interesting, but obviously most of it that I've heard is mostly European speaks of aliens as invading parties and all that, but yeah. All right, so Tsuebu, you may speak. So Tsuebu, you requested a mic. Would you like to speak? Okay.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You may speak. Unmute your mic.
I was not gonna speak, sir. We can't do this to our sisters, my brother. We cannot do this. We cannot entertain this kind of question.
Why?
I have pictures of our ancestors doing the work, starting it out from small, the whole dynasty, as you said.
Yeah.
There is my brother.
Yeah.
We can't expect the Europeans to come here, and because they don't believe that we are good. No, they must stop this thing. Please, Europeans, this is our civilization. You took away our things, now you're going to come and tell us that this is not ours. They took everything, they took the square and compass, and then now they come, they're going to tell us it's not ours. No, what? It's insulting. Let's not do this again. Please, such people who come here and we want to learn, we don't know, I don't much, but I will be emotional on this because this is our heritage. This is the thing we have of our ancestors, man.
Yeah.
You know what? We have lost everything, but our ancestors, it has come out from the deep. And it sprung. In the wind from springing up. We've lost. There's a lot of things, but at least the wind came up for us from the sun, from the everywhereness of eternity. It has sprung up. We are grateful for that. And then no one will come in and tell us what. Please, Europeans, stay away.
All right, I hear you, brother. I hear your passion. Okay, the only reason I entertained it, the sister sounded like she's family, so I didn't want to shoot it down. We, with family, we have conversations. With outsiders, we use a different tactic. We can see their spirit. But with family, I think we can have a conversation. I understand you, brother. I understand you. Yeah. All right. Okay. You may speak, ma'am. Is your name Lisha?
Lisha.
Oh,
I'm
Lisha.
originally from Trinidad, So,
Okay.
so yes, I do have, lots of I'm not sure where my grandparents, great grandparents came from, but I am mixed with everything. So I believe I originated somewhere in Egypt, long time ago, and this is why I asked you that question, because I've had some amazing spiritual kind of out of this world things happen to me when I traveled there, and I didn't know how to explain it, and to this day I have no idea how to explain it, and it happened in one of the temples. So I am of African descent as well, so I just wanted to let everyone know.
All right, now we recognize you as an African, no doubt. Yes, okay. So in terms of the spiritual connection to that you experience when you're out there, from my perspective, would be the fact that when you took a step, what made you make a decision to go to Comet, I believe, was you answering a call from the ancestors, and when you answered that call and went there, they manifested themselves with the Netaru. So that, I believe, that's the connection that you may have experienced. I also experienced the same thing when I traveled to Comet. And actually how I even ended up there was in 2017 December. I stumbled. I didn't even know Dr. Ben, didn't know Dr. John Henry Clark, didn't know any of these scholars. I was just happened to have been on YouTube, and then I saw Dr. Ben in Egypt. I'm like, okay, this looks interesting. There's a black guy in Egypt. Okay, what is this guy talking about? I'm like, let me check it out. Checked it out. I was like, wow, this is fresh air. Like, this is a scholar, a black scholar that actually talks about Egypt. And I was like, after watching the whole video, and for me, before that, the main thing was, pyramids. And in the documentary, he went and visited the many temples and explained a lot of things. And at that moment, something inside me said, I need to visit the place. I basically said to myself, yeah, probably in 10 years, most definitely I'm going to be there. And to my surprise, less than 12 months, I was there. So I feel like how it happened, it was not my doing. I feel that it was some kind of a calling from the ancestors directing me in that way. And if I may also just give an example that is outside this context, I have a tendency of meeting people, becoming friends with them, only to find out we're related. So I think so far I recall 3 people. And the one guy, in fact, when we were actually out job hunting, I was very young at the time, didn't even have an ID. I was just running away from home, working for free. I wanted to go. Working for free at home was tough, so I figured I'm going to go look for a job and get paid at least. So, yeah, I come from a tough family. No spoiled brats. So, I made a friend. Everyone else there was old. So this guy was just a guy my age, and we became friends and chilled there. There were no cell phones back then. Yeah, so that's a while back. And when I stopped going there, well, I actually didn't even decide. I decided when I woke up that I ain't ever going back there, because you're not getting anything. You're just sitting there and not getting a call to get the job. And one day I was walking out the house and I see this guy, bumped into him, and he's like, I'm like, yeah, what's up, man? It's like, hey, and I'm like, where you going? To that house. I'm like, what do you mean that house? What do you know there? It's like my aunt. I'm like, get the out of here, man. what do you mean your aunt? We need to find out we're cousins. It's not the only one. So, and I look at that and I'm like, it can't be coincidences with all these three people that randomly met in the middle of nowhere, and they happen to be related. The one guy I only found out years later when he was getting married, when I was going to his wedding. My other cousin was going to his wedding, and my sister put the one and two together. And you guys are going to the same wedding. And that's when the news came out that it's family somehow. So that I look at that and I see that our ancestors do form part of our paths, directing our paths. God is directing our paths. The ancestors are like our angels in the Bible. You know, they walk with us and direct our path. So I feel that what you were experiencing was the divine. You had answered the call. If you had not, you would not have experienced that, but went because somehow the ancestors wanted you to go to Comet. For some reason, you answered the call. So when I look at that, anybody that answers a call, because the biggest part, so someone said the biggest part of life is showing up. And sometimes it's not really about using your power. It's just when you show up at the right place, at the right time, answering a call, things just happen in front of you and you can see this has nothing to do with my power. This is a divine orchestration. Yeah, before I sound like a preacher.
No, that you couldn't have said that any better. I love the way you explained it. Truthfully, I do have I can share it with you. I followed you, so I have some other stories for you, but I'd like to share it with you personally and just hear your thoughts on it, because I have video pictures of some things that are kind of out of this world. So I'd like to hear your feedback on it at a later time.
All right, no, that is not a problem. You can send me like an inbox or something, and then you can perhaps, never know, it might take me in a different direction, it always takes something small. That's why I tell people that I am, people in last week's space, people were thinking that I've read 1,000 books, but people will be shocked. I haven't even read 10 books, history books, very small, and I take forever to finish, because currently I'm reading The Golden Age of the Moor. Been reading this the whole year. I'm even embarrassed to say it. It's terrible, and the reason why I take long is I always have to look at the footnotes and then go to the reference and look for the reference and confirm that the reference is, in line with what this guy is saying, so, and sometimes finding these references. So that's just my problem or whatever. Yes, sister.
Okay, so I'm not good with reading as well, because I'm exactly like you. So, sorry, I don't know how to take this off. Okay, there. So, there's this website you can go to. It's called archive.org, and it has a whole bunch of books on history, on ancient Egypt, on everything you would want to know. They've put it into PDF format, and what you can do is there's an app called T2 on my phone. I think it's Text2 that you can download, and if you copy and paste the PDF into that app, it will read it for you. So while you're cooking or cleaning or doing your daily chores or just sitting there doing nothing, you can just play the text and have it read for you, and I think it's the best invention they've invented.
Oh yeah. No. Internet Archive. It was one of my first discoveries after Google Books. Yeah, but Google Books, I used to get free books on Google Books, then I couldn't find them anymore. Then Internet Archives, and unfortunately when I discovered Internet Archives, I used to get a lot of books. Lately, it's become a little bit more difficult because a lot of them are placed on rental. It all has to do with copyright violations, so they get into trouble, these guys as well. All right.
Sorry, some of the books, like at archives.org, I've noticed that a lot of the books have been removed, but a lot are still available. So
true.
I have no affiliation with them at all, but if you do, anyone out there needs any kind of educational stuff, it's the most amazing site I've found.
Yeah.
And they're all free. So yeah.
Yeah, true. It's a good resource amongst others. And speaking of that, I may even share another one. PDF Drive is another one, and then there's idog.pub. That's where you also can get books that are difficult to find in other places as well. All right, family, any contributions, anyone? I know that introverts tend to hold information because they are shy, or tend to think that the information might not be important. But please share with us your thoughts on why Comet is important for all Africans, why we should claim Comet as our classical civilization. I heard people that requested to speak, but they just or maybe they had a network issue. All right. So basically, for those that I'm sure most of us have been exposed to the importance of Comet in terms of its contribution to modern religions, its contributions to law, engineering. In fact, the god of civil engineering is goddess Shishet, and goddess Shishet is often portrayed in leopard skin. So, and for me, that was one of the coolest discoveries when I was there at the temple in, I think, Ombo, because I studied civil engineering. So I was like, yeah, this is one of the coolest things. I've seen documentaries by, or rather, field studies. Ashra Kwesi, one of the scholars I had followed. Actually, I had to obtain his documentaries before going to Comet because I didn't want to get lied to. Well, you can lie to me, but at least I know you're lying. That's all. I wanted to prepare myself when I go there. So I obtained those. And in his documentaries, he's an African American, takes, on a yearly basis, takes a group of people to Comet. His first experience was him going with Dr. Ben, and then decided he's gonna fill the shoes and do what the elders are doing as well. And in his group, he would have doctors, and he would ask them, these instruments that you see, do you recognize them? And it's like, yeah, this is what we use, in surgery and all that. And he's like, did they ever tell you about this in school? And they said no. All they know is the Greeks, So Comet, we should not be shy about embracing Comet, claiming it. We should claim it with both hands aggressively. We should not stutter about it or be apologetic. We should claim it with our hands and teeth and everything that we have, unapologetically. So we don't need even the forces of oppositions that may come. We are no what is this? We do not run from opposition because we are warriors. You gotta be a warrior scholar in order to contribute to the restoration of African people. We cannot be apologetic about it. Our ancestors died, shed their blood. Think about the Dogon running to the mountains for the sole purpose of preserving the culture. I mean, that was a sacrifice. The easiest thing to do was just to stay there and blend in and conform. But they decided to sacrifice for their descendants and run off to the mountains. They were tired of fighting. They were not, it's not like they were running from their first battle. You can think about the battles since the Hyksos, how many thousands of years of fighting, defeating, and then these guys another group comes back and you're fighting, and some people, so they're running the migrations. Anthony Browder, one of the scholars, he speaks of 6 migrations. There's a French, no, I must not call him French. There's an African scholar who comes from a previously French colonized country. His name is a little bit difficult for me to pronounce. So he wrote a text where he speaks about the 6 migrations out of Comet. And you can see now you connect these to the development of other civilizations in West Africa. We can see Amun-Ra, the ram in West Africa. We can see the cobra, the Uraeus cobra, the one that you see on the head of the pharaohs. You can see it in West Africa. So the only thing that would be difficult to determine is whether it came with the migration or it was a matter of common ancestry. So, but obviously that can be determined by doing actual study, if one has the skill and the resources. Yes, you may speak, blessed and highly favored. HRH.
I just want to say that would be Cheikh Anta Diop. Or Job?
Yes.
Is the author. And this is a great subject. I'm sorry I missed the first 2 hours, and I don't like to talk if I've missed everything, so there's no point in me contributing because I don't know what I'd be contributing to. Yeah. However, I do want to say I came in at the point where we were talking about aliens, right? And I will admit, when I was much younger, before I returned to university in the 90s, that I fell a victim to the aliens creating pyramid thing, but with a proper education. And I think that's nobody's fault. And I wouldn't want anybody to think anybody would make fun of anybody, because we as people, whether we're black people or even European people, have been miseducated on African history. And once you're miseducated, you can't imagine that the people there, black people, could create these civilizations, right? So that miseducation, we're missing, 10,000 years of history of people on the African continent, and then we see these great buildings, and we're like, whoa, how did they get there? Must have been an alien. But I just want to say, in order to properly study, you've got to start, somewhere. So I would definitely recommend Cheikh Anta Diop, The African Origin of Civilization. Also, The Destruction of Black Civilization is a good place to start. You start at those 2 books, and then you can progress to more things about, ancient Kemet or Egypt, whatever you want to call it, and that would be helpful. But I agree. Civilization comes from the south, from, Uganda, and then up to what we call Nubia, then up to the Nile Valley, then up. And I think the biggest thing, and I'm listening to you, and I understand you're new to this knowledge beginning in 2017. I want you to know I've been studying for 30 years. And I think where the issue comes right now where we're at as a continent and a people and recovering our history is that it is continuously under attack. So you think you got one thing, people have been writing about this. Black people have been writing about Comet for 150 years, reclaiming that history for ourselves. But we are never to be at rest because it's never going to stop. Right now, we've got DNA all over the place, and DNA saying black people never went anywhere. We've been rooted to the spot, south of Sahara for the last 50,000 years, and everybody else around the planet has been doing everything else. So the issue now is to study it, you have to be multidisciplinary. We have to study DNA, archaeology, history, paleontology, all of it. And that's really hard because it would be really hard for any one person to be really proficient at all of those things, less than one of those things. But I think if anybody came close, it was Cheikh Anta Diop. He was pretty close to mastering as much of the sciences as he could and integrating them into one book as he could. And that's all I wanted to say. I didn't hear the beginning of the show. I know that I put my reminder on, but then I started making my breakfast and I got lost and I missed it. And one thing also, I do follow you on Twitter. These spaces are recordable. If you could record them so people miss, they can get back in and listen to you. That would be great. With that, I yield. I have nothing else to say today. This is a great subject. I wish to return to it more often. And maybe this is such a broad subject, reclaiming it as our classical civilization. Maybe you could focus in on one thing, and then we could talk about that in the future. That would be helpful because there's so many books, so many videos, such large and such vast amount of time to cover that to possibly state why it's important. Footnotes, yes, but to really bore down into why it's important, much harder to do. With that, I yield, and thank you so much. Happy Sunday, everybody. Anyway, with that, I yield.
Thank you, and happy Sunday to you too. Indeed, you mentioned that is a constant battle, and as I said, for one to be a scholar, they need to be a warrior scholar. And when we think about our ancestors, a lot of when I came to Twitter, because I joined Twitter, I think before, I can't remember which year, but I just opened the Twitter and then I wasn't even active because I was more of a Facebook person. So I wanted to first look at how everybody's moving around the space of Twitter. So only 2018, and I decided to come in, coming in fighting guns blazing. And there's a South African woman who is she's big on the Eurocentric narrative, and she had said that we ought to be thankful to colonialism. We have benefited as Africans from colonialism, but obviously she did not. I don't know if she had actually broke it down, but she knew that a common African would automatically justify that in their mind that, oh, well, she's right. Coming to think of it, look, we have buildings, we have roads, and we have paved roads, and we have street lights, So I came in, obviously decided to use that because it was even in the news and it was a big debate on Twitter. And so I decided to use that as a place to come in. And so I quickly, I just stepped into the fast lane immediately. And a lot of people then would come in and join in, and I even had a squad where we had a longest debate, I think, over a year or so, or two. I wasn't in there for 2 years, but I found this debate. It was basically between the so-called modern Egyptians and Africans. And in that debate, I met a lot of guys, and we followed each other, and we were these sort of an invisible, unofficial squad or friends in that aspect, because we all recognize each other there on Twitter. So and so as I kept going, a lot of the people that then followed me would say, "But why do you keep on entertaining these guys? Just ignore them." And I said, "Well, I understand. If I was walking down the street and a white guy came and said, 'Look,' or if I was in Egypt and the white guy said, these Black Americans, they want to claim the civilizations and whatnot, because everyone that goes in and tries, they always think they're African American." And so I'd probably ignore him because it's just the two of us. But my concern is always the third person that's listening. Who is listening, and who, if seeing a champion, a black person champion something. I remember when back in the days I used to do fighting training and kung fu and stuff, and we were in the school we were fighting. It was mostly white kids anyway, white guys, and so I was fighting with a white guy. All the black people that didn't even know me, they're like, yeah, I'm shy, I hit him, they don't know me. But when black people see another black person winning, it does something to their psyche. So I was doing it for me 5 years ago. I was like, okay, I wish I had seen something like that, a black person standing up to these liars and setting the record straight. It always, and I always say I do it for the young ones. By the young ones, I'm not talking about age. I'm not an ageist. By the young ones, I'm talking about those that have the spirit of the youth, who still, because you can be 25 and already be tired and be like, no, I don't want this fight. Just ignore them, So, and the one moment that was quite a moment to remember, I was in Cape Town at the airport, and this young man walks up to me and says, "Are you that Egyptian guy?" I'm like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "No, are you the guy, who posts about Egypt on YouTube? Man, I'm a big fan of yours." And I was like, "Yeah, this is who I do it for, It's you never know whose life you impact, and people might think it's just social media, but it goes beyond that, Someone else impacted me. Just Dr. Ben showing up and doing a documentary completely changed my life. So we can never take it lightly. So I'm always ready for a fight. I'm never tired. So if you think about people, most of our people just generally being tired, imagine you fighting this European, and then when you put your hands down, then the next thing you've got these Arabs coming at you, and then these black people saying, you guys love Egypt, you're not from Egypt, we are West Africans, and you're like, phew, this is too much, But if you get tired from that, imagine how the groups that migrated out of Comet during the Middle and Late Kingdoms, think about why they would move. They were physically fighting, and they were not losing the fight. It's even in their text, they said that the Habiru, he defeats no one and no one conquers him, because he fights like a coward. It's not a toe-to-toe fight. You're sleeping, then he comes at night while you're sleeping and invades your village and stuff. So they had been fighting for a long time. And then others decided, you know what, I'm sick and tired. We're just going to go find a place where there are no mosquitoes. Tired of all these mosquitoes that we have to always kill and stuff. So we're tired of fighting. We're going to go and find some peace and quiet. So some people might see the Dogon fleeing into the mountains and thinking they were cowards. But no, They were not cowards. People just somehow decide, no, I think I'm done fighting. We've been fighting for freaking 2,000 years now. And then the others stayed. You go to Aswan, you see black people still there. You know, they stayed till the end. So if we really think about that, those people even were fighting physically, getting stabbed. Kandake Amanarinas, her eye was injured in battle, but she didn't stop. She still decided, when the Romans were talking about invading Sudan, she's like, okay, I'm not going to wait for you, I'm coming for you. Then in Egypt, she went into Egypt and kicked their butts and took Augustus's bust and took it back and put it at the under the ground. They dug it up where the queen would step on when she walks, as a symbol of subduing. But yeah, she still kept on with an injured eye. So you can imagine the battles were physical. We've been fighting for over 5,000 years. We've been fighting. Even recently, we have people that like Steve Biko, Malcolm X. The fighting has been.
Can I just interject real quickly?
Yeah.
I think what I've learned in my old age is that you can't fight everybody, and everybody's not worth fighting.
True.
So if I come across a person who doesn't know anything, and you can tell because of your breadth of knowledge, they don't know anything.
Yeah.
But they're taking a position from an ego-based position, right?
True.
This is ours, pride. But they don't know anything about history. They don't know anything about DNA. They don't know anything about anthropology. They don't know anything about science.
Yeah.
I usually walk away from that fight because literally you have to re-educate them from ground up. And the time that it takes you. Our life is limited. We're not here forever.
True,
right?
true.
I'd rather be learning than fighting an ignorant person.
Yeah.
That's just me.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to do is listen to people that know a lot but disagree with me.
Yeah,
because in that fight, I'm going to take way more, not less.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to learn what they know and either be able to refute it or absorb it into my worldview or whatever. Not every... And a lot and what I notice, for me personally, as a female who's been studying this for a long time, it's a male-dominated kind of thing. And I find whether you're on, it's always been ego-based. Especially, what are we really fighting about for a lot of people? We're really fighting about my place in the world. How do I explain my place in the world and my position that I'm in? How do I explain how Africa is now compared to, quote-unquote, northern countries or first world countries? How come we're the exploited? How do I explain that, right? Yeah. And usually that's what the fight is about.
Yeah.
It's not about, and it's about our own ego. How do I explain my failure or how do I explain my success in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah.
So usually at my age, my old age, I avoid those fights. If somebody is in their ego and they're fighting about their race, because they're fighting about their place in the world, racists will do.
Yeah.
Whether it's American racists, Trump racists, right-wing racists in America, or it's race scientists in Europe who went out into the world and found most of the world was black. Then they had to figure out how to explain that, How do I worship this Jesus?
Yeah.
And Egypt's in this Bible, and Ethiopia's in this Bible. Then when I get there, and I'm Napoleon, and I show up, and every statue looks like a Negro, and we've enslaved these people, and how do I explain that? So everything that's happened in the past 300 years is that happening. How do a white, European, ego-based person explain how they've been worshiping this God, and then they go to this place, and they find out that they're not included in the story?
Yeah, true.
This is somebody else's story.
Yeah.
And I've been worshiping it. And now I have to explain that, right?
Yeah.
So I issue is, yes, we have to be scholar warriors, but you have to choose your battle. Like, I think that's Sin Chu or whatever his name is, about when you enter a battle, you have to have already won.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
That's how you guarantee yourself winning. If you waste your personal energy on every Tom, Dick, and Harry on the internet, it's not worth it. And what I've learned, what social media has taught me personally, and not as a scholar, but actually as a business person, is that information doesn't disseminate evenly.
Yes.
Every 7 years, there's a new generation. That's how they can make that. I always tell my kids, you know how they make Spider-Man over every 7 years? You ever wonder how they keep making money? We've seen Spider-Man 15 times now.
Yeah.
Yet, every 7 years, there's a 7-year-old boy who needs to see that hero story, right?
Yeah.
And you have to think of it that way. No matter how hard you study, there's going to be some Tom, Dick, or Harry who's not going to know anything about what you've studied.
Yeah.
And they are going to have a whole set of information and facts, and there's no way that you are ever going to be able to make that information across the board even, or enlighten people to the point where we're all embracing this one truth. And, a good example of that is the whole COVID situation in math, right?
Yeah.
Perfect example. There's a science out there that exists that tell you if you wear a mask, you get a shot, you won't get COVID. And then there's we're believing a whole set of different other things. And you have to think of, African history in the same way. No matter how much science you have on your side, there are going to be people out there who are, one, going to refuse to believe it, two, believe a different narrative, just not know.
Yeah.
And for argue from their ego-based interests, nationalistic-based interests. And for me, at this point in my life, I figured, it's not worth the argument. It really isn't, even on social media. What I would hope that you would take from what I'm trying to tell you is you seem to be extremely intelligent, and for someone who's only been studying this for 5 years, you're equal with me who've been doing it for 30. So that just shows you that, again, things are never equal, right? Because I've been working raising kids. It was like a part-time thing for me. So you far in advance, YouTube videos are great. Edify yourself and your knowledge, and because a book will last forever. I don't know if an internet argument will last forever.
True.
You know what I mean?
True.
That energy that you put into social media will never profit you as much as it'll look. It gets kind of integrated. You have to do YouTube videos. You have to build your audience through social media. People will recognize you on the street. But I hope that you take the time to write these things down, and and so that it lasts forever, the generations that follow. With that, I yield. I'm sorry.
All right. No. Thank you very much for your kind words. I am humbled, especially the part where you talk about me starting up only in 2018, and so I think it just boils down to the part where it's beyond just me. If one answers a call to the divine, to God, to the ancestors, and they just show up, a lot of things just happen quite rapidly, because perhaps they have been waiting for you for quite a while. So thank you. And so all I would say, indeed, you are right in terms of the battles and all that. And yes, I believe I would then come in from a position of balance, where I actually personally right now I don't fight as much as I used to. In fact, as one of the sisters that I speak to often, and she even asked me, what happened to all these Eurasians that used to come at you? And I'm like, I don't know what happened. They don't come at me anymore. And And now, even recently, I actually started because they would just step into my tweet and just flood it, and I would be fighting. But now, I don't even. They avoid me. I step in now a little bit and they block me. I actually decided to start a little fight with one, and they blocked me. So, so they truly, I think in the stage also has brought me to a place. In the beginning, it was a strategy to just keep fighting them, but currently there isn't much of fighting. Even if you look at the content, I don't. There isn't much debate, except the ones probably that I've started. Except there's only one recently that actually someone else decided to start, which was the brother who said that they are from Tanzania, they are not from Egypt. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for your contribution. It's always great to hear the wisdom of the elders. Black Excellence, you may speak. Okay, Black Excellence, looks like he's not here. I'm gonna, wow, okay. I'm gonna, let me, because his mic is on, it's making a sound. Let me add, where's that brother now? Okay. Mr. Shaka Zulu. I want to say your whole name right now. I see you were requesting to speak, but you disappeared. So I've added you on. Sister Alicia, do you want to speak? You're the only.
Oh, sorry. I think I accidentally clicked the speaker button. I did have a question for you, and when I remember it, I'll put my hand back up again because it slipped my mind. Sorry.
All right, sweet, no problem. Yeah, Mr. Shaka Zulu, speak to us, bruh. What?
I also requested by mistake.
Okay.
But I wanted to say, don't stop fighting with them, please. They need to know. And every 7 years, when we get more new Eurasians that want to talk a whole bunch of nonsense, fight with those two, okay?
No, my kids are gonna fight with them, and my grandkids.
No, fight with them, but teach them. You gotta teach them, okay?
Yeah.
Every batch.
Yeah.
Every new batch that comes has to learn.
Yeah.
We have time some days. But sorry. Some people have more important stuff to say to them.
No doubt. No, thanks. No, that's important as well. But I would say I'm not really interested in educating them because I'm very selfish. I only deal. In fact, if I can even give you guys examples here on Twitter, there's a guy who actually came up on Twitter. There's a few years back. No, let me not say years back, as if it was a long time ago. I don't know when, but over a period of time, there have been people that came into my post and they asked questions, and I asked them, "Are you African?" And they were not fighting; they were just asking. They were asking but I could see where the question is going. It's actually in the direction of disputing that African people. They claim that of the greatness that you are claiming and whatnot. And I asked them, are you African? And the guys, one of them said no. I'm like, oh, well, this is family matter, you know. And the other one claimed that they're African, and I responded to them in one of the native languages. And I'm like, oh, so you don't understand? Sorry, this is none of your business. We ain't got nothing against you, but this is a family meeting. It's family matters. So my attitude really, I'm not really interested in educating because I have a strong reverence for the ancestors, and the ancestors never really gave out education for free. You had to give the greatest offering, which was yourself, becoming an initiate, is greater than giving, paying a tuition with money. You're giving of your whole soul. Because as a scholar, you can imagine having to study some of these Greeks studied 11 years in Comet, some 14 years. That's giving up a big portion of your life, and also having to be circumcised, and you giving of your soul, because when you're there, you have to submit yourself to the whole process. There was no, okay, after school I'm going to go back to being a Greek. They had to live the entire 24 hours of those 14 years as an initiate of Kemet, and probably the diet that they had to eat, So where we messed up as Africans is when the Moors evangelized African knowledge. That's why you see the Greeks never disrespected Africa. They always stood in awe of us. Even Alexander the Greek did not invade Africa in that aspect. It's the Africans who actually messed up and said, look, come help us with these Persians. And so he helped them, and he figured, okay, so I did all of this. They hired him as a mercenary. So he was fighting for Kemet. And the reason why they sought Greeks was, at the time, we had a complete consciousness fallout, because throughout the dynasties, whenever Kemet was in trouble, they moved to the south. They went to the south to get help. And that's how they always restored. And the greatest restoration of Kemet, of all the restorations, is the 25th dynasty. It was not an invasion, as people say. If you really look at the text and the history, you can see even the common people were very, very happy to see Pianki coming in and subduing the local rulers who were collaborating with these Asiatic Caucasians. And they actually celebrated that. The people, it even says that they were celebrating in the streets when they saw Pianki and his men coming in. And the manner in which they did everything, and the actual restoration, you see stuff in the 25th dynasty that you hadn't seen since the Old Kingdom. We even know of the Memphite theology. We would not know about the Memphite theology if it wasn't for the 25th dynasty. So it was a restoration. So the people of Kemet have always known to go to their brothers and sisters in Kush to get assistance, and things would always work out. But then later, out of envy, because this is after the 25th dynasty, then the later dynasty that actually kicked out the 25th dynasty, because they hated them. There was beef, tribal beef. And so they decided they're going to assault the Greeks. And that was the downfall. The Greeks never left Greek and Greece and say we're going to invade Comet. They never thought that was possible. So even Alexander was just a mercenary. He never had those ambitions because they had so much respect. So where we messed up is when the Moors eliminated the traditional African form of teaching, which was teaching the initiate. You had to earn the education. You had to earn the education. It was not evangelized. So due to the nature of the conquest, which was Umayyad, coming from the Arabs and Islam, the Africans who became part of the Umayyad, they later called the Moors, they had taken a different culture, but carrying African knowledge, but disseminating it using Asiatic culture, or rather Caucasian Asiatic culture, which was opposite to the whole form of initiation. Even today, that concept, even though heavily watered down, we still have that in our culture, where even Dr. English, who wrote a text on the African origins of mathematics, he actually discovered that all these binary codes and all these things came from the divination processes that Africans still practice today. But when he went there, they only shared a little bit. Some of the things they refused to share with him because of he was not an initiate. But yeah, hence I follow the blueprint of the ancestors. They never evangelized information. So whenever I engage a Eurasian, my focus is not on them. My focus is on these Africans that are seeing this. If they can see how truth can be used to debunk lies, some of them probably would be the first time they actually see this truth. So this is my only focus. But sometimes, yes, I have learned to choose my battles. Some of them I've ignored, especially the ones that came and said, so where do you waste the evidence of this? I'm like, okay, state your identity. Are you an African? Yes, Miss Lisha, you may speak.
Hello. Okay, I just wanted to mention back to Egypt. When I was on my travels there and I was going in the pyramid, one of the ladies, very shy, says to me, you look like Nefertiti. And I asked her, I go, why? Because everyone was telling me that. So I said to her, why do you think so? And she said to me, because you have the same color skin as they had back in ancient Egypt. And she also told me that my nose is the same as theirs were. And that struck me because I was like, I've always known that the statues and stuff, the reason they shot off their nose and used it as targets was because it was a black nose.
True.
You know, so I was kind of taken back by that.
Yeah. True. Although, yes, at a later stage, mainly the reason, especially the Heru Emaket, the so-called the Great Sphinx, apparently the nose and the lips were actually they are secretly held by the British Museum and stuff, courtesy of Ivan van Sertima. That's how I know this information, because he went with a delegation of Egypt to go and request it from the British Museum. But yeah, so yeah, no, what you say, a similar thing happened to me, but it's not something they said about me. The only thing where I was actually surprised is where there's a native of S1. He was sitting next to me in the plane, and he actually greeted me in his local language, and then when he came in, he sat down. So we didn't talk until we were about to land, so about 20 minutes to landing when they make the announcement. Then we start talking. He's like, so where are you from? I'm like, no, I'm from South Africa. And he's like, oh, I thought you were from S1. And I'm like, really? Like, how? And and he figured, he's like, but when I greeted you, your response threw you off. I knew this dude aimed from here. But what the other part that surprised me, when I went to is a shop where they sell papyruses, and they even show you, I even showed a video, it's on my YouTube channel, where they show you how to make papyrus. So they make it right in front of you, but obviously you're not gonna see the dried one, but they actually start the process for you right in front of you, peeling it off and chopping and whatnot. And so I decided to buy, and I was shopping around looking, and I wanted to buy one of some of the papyruses there. And while walking through, the guy that was actually presenting to me, he's like, I don't know if he's Arab or your Caucasian Egyptian type. So I saw one of the papyruses with 4 men dressed like ancient Egyptians, and they were black. And then it stated at the top, what? It said black history is something about the world began with black history, something like that. So I looked at that. He saw my reaction. I didn't obviously want to say anything to him because I had my prejudice thinking he's probably going to be like, nah, it's just something we want to sell to black people. I didn't even say anything. He just saw my reaction. He's like, it's true. And I was like, yeah, so interesting thing there. Anyway, we could share all these great moments about our experiences in Comet and everywhere, Ethiopia. All right, are there any other comments, questions, or... Because we are now about to close. How long have we been speaking? And by the way, this has been recorded. I just do not know how to record it on the app, on the Twitter app. If somebody could, I should actually learn how to do that. But I use my own method. Record it on my laptop. But yeah, I will be posting it on YouTube for those that would like to, that have missed the introduction. Yes, J.D. Bailey, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. If I'm not, forgiveness. You may speak.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having this forum,
It's a pleasure.
this space. And usually I do not speak, I usually listen. But I feel that this one is important in the sense that of the reason for this space in terms of making history known, the correct history. And sometimes I do also as well have discussions with different brothers that are, why do you focus so much on this?
Yeah.
And it is important because it's the beginning. It's the doorway to everything else. And it's okay that there are brothers that do not want to focus on it, but it is a focus. It is important that we make sure that this is protected because I'm not going to speak long, but I will say that when you see in history throughout in the West, when they have these pictures of ancient Africans, they're always white, but they remember to make the slaves black. Their awareness is there. And so, understanding the trickery that they use, they recognize that blacks are present in Africa, but the roles of the important ones they make white. So, when I saw that this space was going to be on, I said, this is something that's very interesting. And we need to keep fighting to assure that this information continues on so that it grows and that more generations and more people are aware of the wonderfulness that is the continent of Africa. I will say that Africa is one country because based on how the definition of a country, it doesn't operate like one in my opinion, but it is one country. We are one people. We do have a culture and many different sides of it. There is not a space in terms of our understanding where, like in the Eurasians, where it's either one or the other. In Africa, many things can exist and be okay, and so can our opinions and ideas. A majority, not all, because some are opposed. Some ideas are opposite to another. But just like we have many different groups, many different families in Africa, we are still all one people. We are still all African. The thing that I want to add and I want to leave in talking about the importance of really anchoring this in Kemet and all of Africa is that part of my culture, I will tell you something personally, does come from what they call the Middle East. anyone that is familiar with me and will know that I will really defend that as being part of Africa. Geologically speaking, what they call the so-called Middle East is all the continent of Africa. It's Northeast Africa. We must never let that go. We must always call the people that are there invaders, colonizers. Even though that they had been there a long time, they are still colonizers who never left. When someone comes into your house and they stay, no matter how long they stay, they are still someone that goes to your house. You live there. That's your house. This is our house. And so part of this, the reason why I want to add into what they call the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula. Remember, the rhino has two horns. Also Somalia and Ethiopia, and also off what they call the Arabian Peninsula. All of that is the continent of Africa. Geologically speaking, is the continent of Africa. If you lift up the continent like a plate, it will pull the Arabian Peninsula, part of Iran, part of Turkey, part of the Caucasus Mountains, because those were the borders. And so we must never let that go, because part of the importance of Comet, our focus is on Comet, their focus is on Egypt. But all of it together is our history, and it's black. And yes, we must let them know that, yes, you're the so-called modern Egyptians, just like they say in Israel, the modern nation of Israel. They have to give themselves that name because they have no connection. There's no blood there. So we must also, in my opinion, stop using these names as MENA region, Middle East, North Africa. They will try and do the same thing and carve out Africa like they did during the Berlin Conference. We need to tell our history. We need to speak to each other, and we can have different opinions, but that we support Africa. That even though there are some brothers that say, I am not from Egypt, so I cannot claim that. You can, because look at the opposite. The Irish that are in the United States, they claim Ireland. The Italians that are in the UK, they still claim Italy. No one questions that. So why is it wrong? Or why should it not be allowed that someone from West Africa can claim being from the Nile Valley? We all came from there anyway. So, like you, brother, as you were mentioning, you have these battles, but these battles are important. And I just want to leave that point there, is that when we are talking about the truth about Africa, we must not leave out, please, places like what was called Palestine, because it had an African name before that. What was Babylonia before, because it had Africans there. And yes, once they left Africa, like in India and so forth, and the Pacific Islands, those were all still our brothers there. And we must not, in my opinion, leave them out. Because then when we leave them out, they don't have a connection to us. Because when we leave out a brother or sister, they start to become resentful, and they start to pay attention to the one who gives them attention. So the reason I say that as my last statement is that we have these discussions between, oh, this one is black, that one's not black. Those definitions are coming from a miseducation of the African mind by Eurasians. We must throw all of that away, because it is not African. It is not our way. It is not the ancient ways that made all these glorious things that they're now continuously trying to steal. If we validate those things, because they cannot do it unless we validate it. We validated their bogus religions. We validated these ideas about different species. We must reject those things and go back to our ancient ways. Because the beginning, to correct the story, when you're going down a wrong path, you have to go back to where you veered off, and then to continue on the right way. So I look forward to more of these spaces that allows these discussions. But always remember that we are the first ones. We are the oldest ones. And we must always continue to remind every other branch of the tree that the roots and the stock started in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Powerful information there. And I'd just like to also add that when you mentioned that Europeans claim Italy, and claim those who came from Italy, claim Italy, and those who came from Ireland still claim their Irish blood. And more importantly, I would say they claim the Greeks. Claiming the Greeks, they are not saying they are Greeks, but they all stand in unison saying that the Greeks are the foundation of all knowledge. They all agree and lie about the Greeks being the fathers of medicine and philosophy. It's not probably the people that came up with the concept are probably not modern Greeks. So it just shows the whole concept of drawing upon a classical civilization. And speaking of Africa as going beyond the borders that are conceived today, I would just like to also, for anyone that wants an ancient reference, the ancient Greeks, Herodotus as an example, he spoke of Ethiopians of India. And the term Ethiopians was, remember, he speaks of Indians. So he understood they are Indians. But Ethiopians was a term that the Greeks used to describe black people specifically, not just dark-skinned people. Like people like to use the word melanated people. I'm not a big fan of that because some of the melanated people are some of the biggest racists, like Indians. Indians, in fact, that take the crown above even Europeans. Our people in India today still suffer the dignity being stripped away from them. We have people that are called untouchables. They have to sweep wherever they've stepped on in public. These are black people that look like you and I. When you go to Mumbai and Delhi and wherever, you will not see them because these people are in the outskirts. And one of when you speak of not isolating our people that are out there and saying they're not African, I was touched by a brother who was in India and he was in an African village and was speaking to the people there, and there was one of them was translating and just explaining. He could speak the language and English. So then one of the young ladies, they were sitting there. You can see if no one said it was India, you think it's some place in Central Africa, West Africa. The way they're just doing things, sitting there, they're busy chopping vegetables and whatnot. So one of the young ladies there said, she asked a question in the language they speak there. The guy translated, and she's like, what is it like? What is Africa like? I would like to go there one day, And I thought about how people out there, you go to, the biggest scholar in actually coming into contact, creating contact with African people outside of the continent. I know some people would say, yeah, they're not African and whatnot. Eventually, like the brother said, that as African culture is not discriminatory. So by definition, some people would even say, oh, well, all humans come from Africa. In my then opinion, is all humans that have remained African are still African. So what makes Europeans non-African is that they've lost their culture, because the African culture is Ubuntu, Umuntu, Ngumuntu, Ngabantu. You are human because of other people. And Europeans have deviated. They don't follow their culture, so that makes them not African. But when you go to the islands and you see their people, they still have that culture. So for me, they're still African. And DNA, you can talk about DNA all day. DNA is not, it does not fully define things. It does not put things fully into perspective. I mean, it's saying DNA says that a person is of a certain race. That's like thinking that a race is a scientific concept. It is not, because human beings are connected. So there's a king. One of the chiefs in Botswana. His name was Khama the Great. Khama the Third. If you look at him, he looks super black. Look at his descendants today. They look Caucasian, 100%. They don't look mixed, or so-called mixed. They're just Caucasian. He's just white. And that happened because one of his descendants decided to give up his royalty to get a white girl, and therefore his children and them also continued in that line and married white people. So they got paled out. So if you were to take a DNA test, they're white, but if you take a DNA test, they're related to Khama. He's a black man. He's still their ancestor. So DNA does not tell a full story. It's like saying linguistics. When we use linguistics, linguistically speaking, the ancient Egyptians spoke a Bantu language. Linguistically speaking, the Sumerians spoke a Bantu language. And this has been portrayed by linguists even of European origin. But someone cannot just use linguistics all alone. If, yes, the Sumerians spoke a Bantu language, we are all speaking English right now. Someone 200 years later will say, well, those were English people. Those were all white people. They were speaking English. Some people even argue about the Moors and say, well, his name is Muhammad so and so. So why do you say he's black? I'm like, because it was Muhammad Ali. So linguistics alone does not prove the race, because race is not a full concept. It's not a scientific concept. However, when you now go into what they call themselves as Sagiga and so on, you can actually finally conclude using different factors. So the Herodotus spoke of Ethiopians, of India, all the way, even Arabia. And I'll also show you the Bible is not a history book, but mythology also tells you how the people, it actually reveals the people's consciousness of a matter. So even if you write fiction, unless you go extreme, but if you just write basic fiction, you will talk about human beings with 2 arms, 2 legs, generally. Does not mean that your mythology is actually, but you use natural concepts that exist. So in the Bible, we see that in Eden, Genesis chapter 2 also proves that Arabia today, or the so-called Middle East, was part of Africa. And we see that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10. Like I said, it's not history. It's mythology, but it gives you the direction of how the people thought geographically at that time. Because the Bible uses real geography, just like any great fiction does, The Greek mythology as well, they used actual names that existed, in mythology. And so in verse 10 it says, and the river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pasan, that is which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of the land is good, where there is, I don't know how to pronounce that, bdellium and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same it is that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is which goeth towards the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. So think about that. You have a river, the third river, it goes east, towards the east of Assyria. So that is not in Africa. In today's demarcation of Africa, that is in the Middle East, that side. So now the Ethiopia that is being spoken of, obviously then, if the other river, the third river from the same garden, it flows into Assyria, surely a river cannot cross the Red Sea. But it going into Assyria, it already tells us where this region is. It's not in the modern demarcation of Africa. It's in the so-called Middle East. So therefore, the Ethiopia, the second river that flows out of the Eden and covers the whole land of Ethiopia, is not speaking of Ethiopia in the continent of Africa, according to Europeans' demarcation of what Africa is. That's Ethiopia in Arabia, or in the Middle East, because that whole area was considered by the Greeks as Ethiopians. So yeah, indeed, there is a lot to be done in terms of the restoration. We need more warrior scholars, and to bring in the balance, one has to really choose their battles. You cannot just go about fighting everything that comes your way, so, but staying in the fight, indeed we need to, if people are trying to, our own people, some of them are trying to block us from claiming ancient Egypt, what about we have brothers and sisters all around. I think even before I came into the knowledge of the history, I visited Pakistan for the first time in 2010. The client took us out to this restaurant, and I saw a brother there. I'm like, nah. I walked up to the guy. I looked at him. This guy looks South African. So I went up to him and I said, hola. The guy greeted me in Urdu. And so I went back and I asked him, like, where do these guys? They're like, oh no, we call them Baloch, they're from Balochistan. Like, so when did they get here? They're like, no, they've always been here. So they are there in Pakistan, in India, and many of them have a connection to Africa. Many of them even express their dream to come to Africa. So we should understand. I mean, if you look at the Andaman people, they still carry the African culture. They are not different from the Maasai, the Surma, and the Dogon. The Dogon people, they still live exactly like that. So for me, I don't see what makes them not African, because their culture still remains African. So, and since all humans came from Africa and their culture is still African, they are Asiatic and they're still African. Thank you. But yeah, anyway, that could be a lot of people would wanna debate that forever. But yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation and contribution to the space. It's been a good one. I did not think it would go this long. We've been going at it for 3 hours now. And once again, it is being recorded. I will post it up on YouTube for anybody that missed any parts of the discussion. And in ending, I would like to read from one of the Europeans that traveled to Egypt. This is prior to the 19th century, when Europeans decided to switch the whole thing and decide we're gonna make it a white thing. The French visited Egypt first. They were the first Europeans to actually go and visit Egypt, and in terms of going to discover things in terms of the history. And there's a Frenchman called Count Constantine de Volney in 1787. This is before Egyptology started, with the aim of shifting Egypt away from Africa and looking to find, their aim was to validate the Bible as a history book. But 200 years later, they still haven't found one artifact or one link to the Bible, which is the only link is just stuff that was copied from Comet in the Bible. So upon visiting Comet, Count Constantine de Volney, upon his own observations, he was shocked, because this is during the era of slavery, and he came from a country and a place where they had subjugated African people and reduced them to property, you know. And so he wrote, upon his shock, he said, "Just to think that this race of black men, today our slave and the object of our scorn, is the very race to which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech." So with that being said, we will end it here, and wish everybody a blessed Sunday. Peace and black power. Ashe.